Okay. So if you're joining us via, oh, and there's Jen, great. If you're joining us via YouTube, we've just gone live on a thing we're calling eCar Talk. It's a little presentation panel discussion by people from Holladay UCC that have electric cars or plug-in hybrids. And so welcome. There's going to be ample time for a question and answer at the end of it. And each one is going to talk a little bit about that. And we'll give it another couple minutes. I'm sure everybody at Holladay is excited to hear that we may very well have a new senior pastor on our way. So, you know, that's good. So good news to hear. Jen, you were fine with our planned order where you would be second after Marcus. Great.
Absolutely. Yep.
Excellent. Just for everybody's awareness, there are folks that are on YouTube. And so one of them is Chris Thomas, who is our chair of the Green Justice team. So, and we don't know who else is on there. So yeah, it'll be harder for them to ask questions via YouTube, but in Chris's case, Chris had a Volt several years ago. So, yep, and I see in the chat box the link to YouTube if anybody should wish to go there. But we hope you stay here in Zoom. Those 6 of us fill the screen very nicely. Let me check the time. We are 1 minute after 6. So we'll give it another minute and then we'll get started, if that sounds good to everybody. How's the weather in Salt Lake City? Is it pretty good? A lot nicer than it was 4 days ago.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, great. So we're in, I'm connecting from Ohio, looking forward to coming back to Salt Lake in another 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. We don't know yet for sure. But in any case, it's been a cold and rainy day here because we are in the afterwash of the most recent number 7 of named hurricanes that have hit the southeastern part of the country. We're getting wet here. So,
Jen, you can appreciate this. A tornado has hit. I've got a piece of property in Louisiana. It's hit it 3 times.
wow.
I mean, it's not my, you know, it's a bank property, right? It's like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
Still, wow.
3 times. Oh well.
That's what you get for taking property in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome. Carlin will also be joining us at some point at the seat right to my side here. So, but I think we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody should know that, I mentioned this before, that we are also on YouTube, and we know Chris Thomas at least, and probably others are on there. And at our last Green Justice meeting, which was a week and a day ago, we did agree that we could always do this again. There was some question whether this was too soon or how the timing was relative to the election. But we thought, why not? Go ahead, because more green things to talk about before this election is likely to be a good thing. So I'm Steve Ritchie, and a longtime member of the Green team at Holladay UCC. And we have 3 others with us that are going to speak about their electric cars. And the first is going to be Marcus. And so, Marcus, do you want to go ahead and start and tell us about the joys, trials, tribulations, whatever, of electric car? And he always got pictures. Here we go.
Yes, I'm known as Marcus Pegasus, and I wanted to show some pictures of the car. We have 2 of them. There's the front ends of both of them. One of them's a 2011 and one of them's a 2014. And both of them are Nissan Leafs, and that means they've got these 2 connectors, the larger one on the left and the smaller one. The larger one on the left is for DC, and that's limited for finding places that actually have three-phase electricity to charge your car with at high speed. That's a level 3. The one on the right is either level 1 or level 2, depending on what source is going into it. This is the kind of thing I have at home, so I just plug it in every night. We pay about less than $15 a month for electricity on this to drive these cars around. We also have one of these, which is level 2, but you might be able to see from that picture, you have to plug it into like a 220 volt thing in your house, which would be like a dryer, an electric dryer, perhaps. We haven't used ours. We have one of these. It's so far away because we're in an apartment. So that's been one of the hazards or one of the difficulties is if you don't have a garage with this kind of an outlet, then you need a long extension cord. And these are usually like $500 devices there. And there's a lot of different styles around. Like this was probably an advertisement for Tesla because they're showing off that they do it all, AC and DC with one plug. But the North America one on the left side are basically the different kinds that there's actually 3 kinds that we can find that are available. And sometimes I just see one of these sitting in the wall and it's open and available so I can charge up that way. This is one of those 3-phase ones, as I showed you earlier on that picture where we've got the bigger one on the left and the smaller one on the right. Same thing here, the bigger one on the left is that blue handle. And there's that big, huge electrical box. So most people don't install these in their houses. I don't know, maybe some billionaire can do that, but it's a high level electricity. And I just use these 4 apps. I don't really use the 2 on the right. So if I have to go long distance, then I'm got my range anxiety. I'm looking at that because these Nissan Leafs only go about 80 miles at best before you got to charge them again. So I'm usually using those ones in the middle. And then it shows like, this is just a random shot from today. There's over 1,000 chargers that are available publicly, either for free or for cost in the between Provo and Ogden. And this is more zoomed in to Provo to Ogden, so you can see all the different chargers available. And this is a different app that I use because this one also shows houses. People have put their own homes up there and said, hey, you can come to my house and charge. So those icons of the houses are good for my Nissan Leaf and some other kinds of cars. And I often go here to this one at Sandy City Hall because they always have a lot of chargers available. Those high-speed ones are bigger ones. There's one of our cars charging. There's the other one charging it. And that's great because it's 24 hours. And this particular one is only 5 miles from home. So right there, I'm hooked into the high-speed one at nighttime. And even during the daytime, there's often those are available. So anyway, it's been very great, wonderful, useful. The best thing of all, of course, is only having a battery and wheels and never having to do oil changes, never having to change a transmission, never having to do any of those kinds of things, which is going to save thousands of dollars over the next decade while we're using these. I like going to this one too because it's a level 3 charger in Park City that's free. And so whenever I can find free charging, that's nice. And there we are back at the beginning again, our 2 cars. We were lucky in California to get one for virtually free because there's a program in California. I know most people looking at this are probably not in the Central Valley of California like I was for 2 years, in a poor enough income bracket and driving a polluting diesel for 2 years and promising to drive an electric car with no air pollution locally for 2.5 years. So they basically, the state of California, for people that met those requirements, you know, they give $9,500 to the dealership and you get the car and pay whatever there is extra. And you turn in your old clunker and they melt it down so that nobody will recycle that car and be polluting on the road again. So it was a really cool program that we were just lucky enough to barely fit into the requirements. So that was a $300 car. And the other one's costing $5,000. We're just paying $100 a month. And like I said, like less than $15 a month on electricity. Probably about $10 at home and like $5 out in public when we do it. It's just so much better than the year before we got either of these electric cars. And I was running vegetable oil diesel cars for, you know, a decade. And there's all those moving parts in an internal combustion engine. So I had a really bad year in 2018. So I was very thankful to God that we got this other car with no maintenance except for, you know, tires and every once in a while suspension. That's our story. We love it. I'm a big advocate for people to do this. If you're going to get a used car or even a new car, and you can afford the $10,000 or $8,000, and you don't need to drive to California and back, then you can get one of these older cars. But nowadays, somebody else will probably talk about this, that every car is at least 200 miles range as of last year. So we can only afford the $5,000 cars, which are 10 years old or 5 years old. But all the new ones are getting better. So that's the basics. And I'll take questions at the end if people want to talk. And I think other people are going to talk about their cars now. And Jennifer's next.
Yeah, so I am so glad, Marcus, that you had pictures. Because I don't have any pictures, but I could just duplicate what you have. It was a wonderful setup for all of us. Thank you. We have an Audi A3. It's a hybrid electric, and so what that means is that the first usually about 25 miles are all electric, and then once we hit that mark, it switches over to hybrid. So what it ends up calculating out to be, based on our driving habits, about 100 miles per gallon of range, because of what our trips look like. We have all of the same items that Marcus covered as a level 2 charger. In our old house, we did have that built into our garage. There's an investment to put that in. Here, where we're at now, we haven't done that yet because of the cost involved. So it's a level 1. So level 2 charges in about 2.5 hours fully, and then level 1 can take up to 8 hours. So they'll do that overnight. The advantages for us in having, we wanted the flexibility of being able to go long distances, and we also were looking at a new car. So we chose, we actually don't go that long of distance. In fact, most of our trips can get, wherever we're going in the valley, we can get there on a charge, and then it just charges back up. So that's proven to be pretty helpful to us. And our next car will also it will have more range, but we'll also be looking at something with towing capacity. So those are coming onto the market now. Cars with towing capacity that are electric or electric hybrid. So that's, we're looking forward to that. It's interesting in terms of where the market's going overall. We are in I'm hearing I saw a note that said Cohen capacity, just to articulate it better. Towing, so towing a trailer capacity. Yeah, so there we go. Perfect. So just where the market is going, I'm involved in building a very large campus center in Midvale for my employer. Will be about 2,000 people located in this location. And we've been working with a local nonprofit looking at what the future needs are. We actually are going to be putting in 160 charging stations for this location, with the capacity to grow up immediately to 15 and then up to 20, because many manufacturers like Volvo, for example, is going to be move pure to electric. So we certainly, long term, where the market is going, the access to those facilities are becoming more and more prevalent as consumers move to these cars that offer a lot of flexibility.
Well, great. Well,
So
thanks.
who's next?
So Don is next.
Thank you. I actually got into the electric car market and everything kind of as a challenge from a minister at Holladay that that said, "Hey, if you're looking to replace your car, try this and make those decisions early." And I was involved, I think, a little bit with solar in 2012 with Park City Solar, and so I started looking into it. And I didn't come about it. I don't drive. I drive an awful lot, and I rely a lot on my car, but I don't go very far. So most of my trips are all within 100 miles. I'd say the only time I really want to go on a long trip is during vacation. And I heard a couple of people make some comments of, well, just rent a car. And I started thinking about it, and I said, okay, let's try that. So I just put down on a piece of paper what the costs are. What's the cost of the car? What's the insurance? What's the fuel? What's the maintenance? And I lined it out with all these cars. And quite honestly, it was a lot cheaper to go electric than anything else. So that's what I did. I started with a Leaf, and my first experience was driving there were a group of people that were doing Park City Solar. And we were talking a little bit before this started about a lot of anxiety. And I think I had a lot of anxiety about, I got to rely on the car. And what happens if I can't get somewhere, or if I need to charge, or, the car breaks, or what will happen? And so what I started to do was, one of the people said, here, meet me down here in Salt Lake. I'm going to drive you up to Park City for one of our meetings. And I said, okay. And that was my first drive in a Leaf. And I think it was an 11 or 12, just like Marcus's. And I was just fascinated. I'm like, hey, this is fantastic, because they're very fast. They've got a lot of torque. They have great heaters. I don't know if anybody is used to, I get really cold. And so electric cars have the best heaters. At least these Leafs have the best heaters. They heat up immediately and very quickly. They have absolutely no maintenance. At least mine didn't. Mine had, I didn't have any. I had one for 3 years, and then I turned it in and got a new one. That's kind of what sold me. I looked at the costs of, people would be very, they'd always question me and say, okay, well, you're just polluting more because now you're going to our coal-fired power plants to generate the electricity. So you're not doing any good, Don. And I said, okay. I happen to know a client up in Park City that had one of the very first Teslas. It was an S Tesla. And he's a very well-known guy there. And what he did is he said, I'll just put solar panels on my house, and then I'll charge it off the solar panels. And I said, well, that's great, except I can't do that. So I contacted Rocky Mountain Power, and they came up with a program where you can buy your solar in Milford, Utah. And so that's what I do. I pay 11 cents a kilowatt hour and buy it in Milford, and it comes directly from the solar farm. And so that's kind of my way of justifying not using additional electric power from another source. But, a lot of you asked me to come up with some good ideas about the cons, and I think range anxiety is everybody's number one thing. It's like, okay, what happens when you go up there? The other thing that's difficult for the Leafs and the Teslas is depending on how they record. And if you think about it and you forget to plug your car in, how far will it go? And it really depends on whether or not you're going uphill or downhill. And it's kind of, you have to get used to it. I bike a lot, and so I kind of understand how much energy it takes to go just a little bit uphill versus just a little bit downhill. And it becomes kind of interesting. But, you know, once you find out that your car can make it to Park City, and that was kind of my limit with my other Leaf. And mine now has about 150. I didn't get the 250 mile range because I just never use it. But kind of similar to Marcus, I didn't buy any extra, you know, chargers or anything like that. I learned that the batteries really operate better if you trickle charge them off of 110. And so just my natural lifestyle, I just take the cord, plug it into the garage door opener, hang it over the car. When I drive in, it hits the cord. That reminds me to plug it in. I plug it in. I let it trickle charge all night on 110. And I think the cost prior to this, my cost for running the same routes and going up and down to Park City was about $200 a month is what I'd spend in gas. And now I spend $80 a month in electricity, additional electricity. So it saves quite a bit that way. The only thing that I've ever had to do is change the tires. They're fantastic as far as the newer ones. I really love because you just drive with one pedal. You don't use a you know, they can auto drive themselves. They're set up just like Teslas. You can go down the road and just turn them on and say, here, drive, and they'll drive. They'll go and do whatever you want. I'm always a little bit scared to do that, but it really helps you drive when you drive with just the gas pedal. It helps you to become, you look out further, you know when you're going to brake, you know what you're going to do. And I think it's a matter of just changing your driving habits versus the car. So, but I think the charging stations, and the other thing I think that's really helpful is at least the Leafs, and all of them do, when they absolutely run out of power and won't go any further, they actually do go further. So they go a long ways. You know, I thought I was going to be stuck one time because I just absolutely ran it out of power. And if it just sits for a bit, and it'll go at least another 10, 15 miles. So you can always find some type of a plug or some kind of an outlet somewhere and charge it up. So that helped me tremendously with range anxiety and getting stuck somewhere. But I can talk about them forever because I love them. So I'll ask, you know, turn it over to people who want to ask questions about it.
Well, great. All right. Well, thanks very much, Don. And also thanks to you, Jen, and also Marcus. We have a 2013 Chevy Volt, which like Jen's car is what's termed as a plug-in hybrid. And before I get into that, I just wanted to mention something about something that you said, Don, about people, and Marcus, you know that I've heard this before too, that people tend to poo-poo plug-in vehicles because you're on the grid, but the actual emission impact is less because so much energy is wasted with an internal combustion engine. Well, you just feel the hood of your car after you've driven somewhere with an internal combustion engine, and there's just a lot of heat. A lot of heat goes out the tailpipe with the emissions, and then a lot of heat is cooled by, you know, the cooling system, the radiator, and so forth with it. So our Volt we bought about 1 year and 2 months ago, and so we put 25,000 miles on it, and it's got a little bit longer range, which during the summer we get close to 50 miles, and that tapers off in the winter, and that's a little bit of a con because in the winter, you're lucky to get 33, 34, 35 miles. And also to address something which you mentioned too, Don, about the battery size and the range and the fact that the Leafs have a little bit more juice in them. The Volt does too, because we have a readout, says how much electricity we've used. It has an 18 kilowatt hour battery in it, and we are on 0 miles electric range when, and there's still almost half the battery left. In other words, we know that 8 or 9 or maybe 10 kilowatt hours have been used up. And this is done by the manufacturers, the designers, so that you're not deep discharging your battery pack. And I don't know if we're going to get a question about the longevity of the battery pack, but with the lithium ion batteries and the fact that they don't deep discharge, people have logged hundreds and hundreds. In fact, I think a Volt driver, at least that I read about online, has racked up 400,000 or 500,000 miles on the Volt. And I wouldn't expect it to be any different because, say, for example, in the full electrics like the Leafs, there are a lot less parts. And that's a real thing, real advantage. A little bit of a negative with the Volt in particular, it was criticized early on. I think they've corrected it in the recent years, but the cooling and heating, the cooling is fine, but the heating, if you're a person who's cold, you can find it a little bit chilly, but it does have a nice feature in the late fall and winter, the time we're in now, where you can actually push a button and it will warm up the car while you're hooked to your home grid, basically. And that's a nice feature that, they did that. One of the biggest things that I really like about it is, the instant torque. In other words, you go to 100% torque almost immediately with an electric motor. And so it means acceleration is good when you need it. And sometimes you do. So it's a big plus with it. But the other thing that we really like is not going to the gas pump. You don't stop to think about this. And of course, somebody would say, well, you got to plug the car in. But, you get home, you're getting out of the car anyway. So how hard is it to flip open the door and, hook it up to the electricity and then go from there with it? And we don't notice the impact of the car on our electric bill. And our electric bill is pretty reasonable here anyway. And it's the electricity that it uses pretty much equivalent to a medium-sized refrigerator or freezer when it charges overnight. And we can charge at 220 or 240. And this time of year, I start thinking we should be doing that because when we warm up the car, we do lose a little bit of range because it not only warms up the car, it warms up the battery. The battery performs better that way. But in any case, we've gone with just the 110 standard charging unit that comes with the car. And it's nice too, because we've done 2 longer trips, one to Eastern New York State last year, and then one to Minnesota, which you're not probably up on your Ohio to Minnesota driving time, but it's 16, 17 hours each way. And on that trip, we still averaged 50 mpg, running the gasoline engine, obviously a fair amount. But around town here, it's almost all electric. And so we were glad, like you, Jen, to wind up looking at the last 20,000 plus miles of close to 100 mpg. And the electricity, I'm sure it costs us a little bit more, but there are a lot of low-cost options. And these days, you can even hunt around and find renewable energy electricity for the same cost. It might not be the same situation that you have, Don, where you actually know it comes from Milford and the solar and wind farms there, but it still means that there's got to be renewable energy somewhere. And so it's good to know that.
And we plugged in at the hotel.
That's the other thing too, is that you would think that a motel or hotel might not let you plug in. We've always asked, but we never found one that said, oh no, you can't do that. And of course it helps when we explain. It's kind of like a refrigerator running, and they probably think, well, people check out of their rooms and leave the AC or electric heat running full blast. So they're used to this anyway, but.
They do want to talk to us about it for some time.
Yeah. So, but that's, definitely something, that, we like about the plug-in hybrid, and like the fact that it's a bridging vehicle, and to going full electric, and kudos to you who do. And I think it's only a matter of time, before we, we do that with the next vehicle with it, just because electric is just really, we enjoy the quiet, like for example, you pull up to an intersection. Of course, we're used to this with hybrids anyway, where there's no engine noise, but
No
still
vibration.
There's no vibration, there's nothing. And the car even has a funny secondary horn for bicyclists and pedestrians, so you don't startle them because the car is so quiet. So, Carlin, do you have anything to add that you think of?
No, I think that's pretty much,
Okay.
I love the car.
So I'm actually going to share my screen now because I wondered if we might have a little bit of time before we get to Q&A. And so I put together a fairly short PowerPoint. In fact, it's really just a few screens, but I did a little cost comparison, and so you might be interested to see that. So let me do that.
Check the chat.
Should we look at the chat? We probably ought to take a quick look at the
Yeah.
chat. I know that there's a number of people that are on YouTube. So, yep, they're mostly thank yous to our panelists and so forth. So that looks good. And we'll get to the questions shortly. So with it, so let me minimize that and go back here, and then I will share my screen. And what am I going to do? This one here and share. And then I'll start at the beginning, which that you already know because it basically says what we're doing, a little introductory type thing. And but let's get to this one here. So this is an Mpg comparison where you see basically what it costs. The Mpg, depending on what the particular car is rated at. And then the next column, that kind of middle column that you see there, is the cost to go 25 miles. So obviously if a car gets 25 miles per gallon and a gallon is $2.19, it costs you $2.19 to go 25 miles. Of course, this doesn't include oil changes and other things, but you know, that's neither here nor there. But with that 25 Mpg car, if you drive at 20,000 miles, then that cost of that car is $1,752. And so now we can go down the column to the typical gasoline hybrid that have been around for a number of years that, you know, we have out in Salt Lake and, you know, I like very much, where it gets 40 to 45 Mpg. And 25 miles instead is $1.37, which is obviously less. And the annual was $700 savings. So there's a big advantage of getting to that. But as we go down this column and you start to get to 80 and 100 Mpg, you see that the annual cost is $500.48. Now that's the gasoline cost. And the electricity could add another probably $100 to $200 depending on how many miles and so forth. And also what the electric rate is. And notice that I put the electric rate at the top at 5 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour, a little bit less than what many people pay, especially in places like Hawaii, you know, where electricity is pretty expensive. But it is good to know that you can now find renewable energy, you know, in this price range if you hunt around for it, and or a little bit more if you want to be sure, like you were, Don, as to where it comes from. But it really says that a lot of people, I think, you know, in fact, I'm sure there are, you know, green justice people that might have tuned into this and have already decided that they can't really afford to have an electric car. And as, you know, Marcus, you pointed out very, you know, rightfully, you know, even the older models are now very reasonable because the original owner has taken advantage of the federal incentive. And then as the car ages, people don't trust the battery pack. And of course, we have the early years of hybrids in the early 2000s where the batteries didn't. In fact, I have a Civic Honda hybrid battery in the basement that I've got to, you know, that I don't need to rejuvenate because we no longer have that car, but I've got to find a home for that battery pack. So, but at any rate, anybody have any questions about this particular grid, or can we just open it up to questions in general? And I will go to the next screen here, which talks about some of the pros. But while you're thinking of questions, I think we covered most of these: reduced emissions, climate change, air quality, much reduced or no gas pumping, long brake life. And it really does improve the brake life. It's also great not to have a car with a muffler. I mean, the Volt has a little one, I think. The quiet ride, instant torque, and savings over high fossil fuel, and that it feels high tech. And I don't know if everybody agrees, but it really does. And it's the future that we need to get to. So why don't we do some questions and answers at this point? Should I leave the screen share up?
Yeah.
Questions with it? I think we can. Anybody have a question at this point? Martha, we'll let you go first and share. You might be on the phone. Any burning questions? And there is another note that Chelsea is, who has the HUCC logo there, is watching the chat box. So
And Keith and Becky.
I don't know if anybody, with those folks that have the newest kind of hybrids, if anybody addressed this more clearly, but I understand that the Volt, for instance, is, and the BMW i3 Rex, the range extender, those are primarily a battery car that has a little generator that runs it, and therefore the torque on the engine of that generator doesn't is not the same as like having a transmission. So those engines, those internal combustion engines merged with the battery on the hybrids that are the new latest thing, I suppose they're going to last a lot longer than like a car engine that's got to run your transmission. It's just powering your battery. How many of those cars are like that? And is the Volt really like that, or is it a myth? And furthermore, can you disconnect that generator if you wanted to and just run on the battery?
That would be an interesting question. I think I'm going to, and I'm not sure whether you're talking Bolt or Volt. The Bolt is a Leaf-like vehicle that Chevy came out with a few years back. But the Volt, you're right, the gasoline engine powers a generator, which charges the battery, and the battery then runs an electric motor, which turns the wheels. So there is no transmission in our Chevy Volt, or any Volt for that matter. And now you're starting, which is amazing when you think about it, that they did this in 2010. I read a review fairly early after it came out because somebody said that they might have over-engineered the car. And I think to a certain extent that's true, which is good. I like over-engineering rather than under-engineering. But at any rate, basically, that system may seem to you like it was really revolutionary, but you take a ride on any train, whether it's a freight train or a passenger train, Amtrak, whatever, they do much the same thing. A diesel engine basically runs a generator, which charges, in this case, then the generator feeds there's no batteries, but it does feed the electric motors, which actually power the train. So locomotives have been this technology for a long time, and they're obviously big, heavy things. So the fact that all this has been worked out means it's pretty likely to be reliable.
And it was exciting hearing about the car that will tow, that's got enough power that Jennifer was talking about. What brand is that one?
There's actually an Audi that will pull. It's not released yet. Kind of a A3 or a Q5 design. I think it might even be a Q5 that we're looking at. There's also a few others that are slated to come out, which is really great. It's going to have, it's a hybrid. It's not full electric, but it will have a range that it's probably 30 to 50 miles. I'm not sure exactly where they're going to slot it at after testing. The nice advantage, or one of the areas we struggled with in getting rid of one of our cars or not having one of our cars be electric, is we wanted to be able to tow a ski boat. It's actually interesting, Dawn's comment around renting a car for long distances. It may be that would actually pencil out to just rent something in those situations where one has to tow.
Yeah, if you have to take a trip, And we actually did it, you know, because we go to up to Idaho every once in a while and say, okay, we got to do that. And so it was really kind of nice to know that, okay, yeah, you can run down, you can grab a great big SUV and load it all up and get everybody in it. And, you know, they're more economical now, you know, so you could get an Audi Q5 and rent one and go up there. But I found that I didn't have to make I just kept my old car, right? And just kept my old car and added this one because the car is not really worth anything, and you know it's worthless. And but it still gives me a backup. And you know, my son drives it up and uses it to go skiing. So I think if you're in that position where you can do that, and you just have the capability of adding a commuter car, that's really a great thing, because we were all concerned right when one of the things that I didn't bring up that I think was really important back in the day is everybody started talking about the fires. You know, well, you're going to put a charging station in your garage and you're going to burn your house down, and you're going to, and there's battery degradation, and that battery will be, you know, and I found nothing even close to that. The charging stations don't require anything. There haven't been, at least to my knowledge, any major fires that have happened because of charging. And I don't think that, I know for a fact when I turned my Leaf in, it had 97% of the battery life that it had. You know, I mean, it was just incredible. So I don't think degradation is a big issue as much as what proponents were trying to say, that it was a, you know, a great big problem. It really hasn't been for me.
But Chelsea's got something.
Go ahead, Pegasus, and then I'm going to ask the question from YouTube watcher.
Okay. I've been trying to find where I can rent a Tesla or something that I can't afford to own for long distance trips, and it's still a pain. I haven't found any of the car companies renting them. So that's kind of a bummer for those of us that would want to use the electric grid and go to Vegas or wherever. So I'm still hoping that they'll break into that somewhere.
We have a question from Christopher. How does the Leaf drive in the snow?
So glad you asked that, because that's my biggest beef about with Nissan, and Steve and I have talked about it several times, but it's great. It's just about the tires. If you put good tires on it. So my expense has been with the Leaf, I have 2 sets of tires. I have summer tires and winter tires, and I switch them over. But when I very first got my Leaf, and there was a huge snowstorm, and my buddy has a place up in Alta, and he said, come on up. And they hadn't plowed the roads. Well, he made it up in an FJ 4-wheel drive. And I was like, great, that's wonderful. I made it up there too. And he couldn't believe it. He's like, yeah, they work just great. But if they come out with the 4-wheel drives, I know that Tesla has them, and they're just very expensive. They're just very expensive. So, you know, the dual motors cost a lot, but I've got a feeling that those will all come down in price sooner or later. But I haven't been stuck anywhere. And I've been up in Park City on some of the meanest stuff and icy stuff. And as long as you've got good tires, you do need to be careful, because you can spin there's so much torque with those that you can spin the tires really easily. So if you know how to drive in snow, I've never been stuck. So I've been maybe fortunate in that respect.
Our car before the Volt was a 2005 Honda Civic stick shift hybrid. And if the pavement is wet with its 1.3 liter engine, if I let the clutch out a little bit too fast or a little bit too much gas, I spin the wheels, all just because of that instantaneous torque, and it just goes right up with it. But generally the cars are quite balanced. And I think the good news is, and it's too bad we didn't wind up with, and maybe one of these days, one of us will get both Kia and I think Hyundai. Hyundai, I think, has an all-wheel drive small SUV. I want to say it's the Kona that is available all-wheel drive. And a magic number, which I think is if you can get a plug-in hybrid that will go 30 or 40 miles, or even a little bit more, you'll find that you drive it a lot on electric, and that it will, it'll be a good value that way. Jen, what you mentioned about towing vehicles, we didn't talk about this, but sometimes now we don't take the freeway going somewhere, or we'll get off an exit earlier because we know the freeway eats up more of the battery. When you're going 60 or 70 miles an hour, most electric cars or electric propelled cars don't have a transmission, they're one gear. And so to get the car going 60 or 70 miles an hour, you're pushing a lot of extra electricity into that motor to get it to do it.
Mhm.
So you can say that that's kind of a con with it, but on the other hand, sometimes you drive places that you might not otherwise. And we're all too much in a hurry in our lives sometimes anyway, aren't we? So, I think that's both a plus and a minus. So.
Yeah, I would add that having an electric car has required me to be more thoughtful about where I choose to go and when I choose to go and how I choose to get there. And it's slowed down my pace of life. I don't go on the freeway as much. If I didn't have Marcus, who is great at always keeping the thing plugged in to maintain the battery quality, I would probably be spending a lot of money at those Chatamos, because it does take patience to go to a level 2 charger and wait for a few hours. But the Chatamo for me can give a great charge in under 30 minutes. And usually it's at a shopping center, so I can go shopping or read a book. I wanted to mention that Christopher on YouTube mentioned that the new Toyota RAV4 Prime has 4-wheel drive.
Oh, okay.
So that's great to know. I had a question. I'm wondering, would any of our panelists buy a gasoline car in the future now that you've experienced electric?
Yeah, it all depends on what the needs are. So my strong preference is to buy an electric car. There's some other, like towing is not one that there's been really good solutions without having to spend $100,000 for a truck or something that has that capability. So and the number of people that could fit into a car. When I had younger children, I wanted more space, and so I think for everybody it's a little bit of difference in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. The good news is that in the now and in the coming years, I think that the market has solved most of those problems. The real question will be affordability on some of them, but those cars are already pretty expensive anyhow if you want a lot of space. So that's the good news is we should all be able to have our needs met.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't plan on, I've got a boat, and I've also got buddies that have big trucks. And so I say, please, 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 can I borrow your truck and take the boat? I know that doesn't work for everybody, but usually I say, okay, you can ski on the boat, and if I can borrow your truck, and that's been my solution and I find out that, quite honestly, if you sit down and think about the number of times, that's what got me hooked. Is I went, okay, really think about the number of times that you go over 100 miles, and just and quite honestly, it's not very many. It really isn't very many. But Jen is correct. Yeah, if you're towing a boat, or, you know, you've got a big construction project or something like that that you have to use that, that's a different thing. But the vast majority of everything that I did, I just found out I didn't need that kind of, you know, it was more like just, and oftentimes it's just me, you know, it's just me in the car. It's not me and the kids. It's not, you know, so if you're one of those people that can take the time to think about the number of trips that you take that are just you and they're under 100 miles, it's pretty amazing. And that's what sold me. I just went, it's pretty easy. We can at least try it, you know, give it a shot.
The biggest con in my mind, the biggest negative, the bad, I don't know, 100-pound gorilla, elephant in the room, whatever, is the cost to the environment of all the nickel and cobalt and lithium, all those things, so that as more and more cars are fully electric or hybrids, the cost to the environment is very hard for me to wrap my mind around when you're comparing, just for the sake of argument, a fully electric lithium-ion battery versus the gasoline power and all the different factors, all the different social justice issues that come into play in terms of whose bodies are being polluted by mining that or working to get the gasoline, all those things, you know, to compare those two, they're both negative. So, but I don't know which is worse, really. If you imagine that, like, if all the cars, half the cars were electric and half the cars were gasoline, would that be a way to try to wrap our minds around how many people are suffering, how much the environment is suffering, how widespread the damage is happening to the planet for running the current amount of cars that are on the planet if they were all swapped out to half electric and half gasoline? That seems like a thought experiment, and somebody's got the numbers on that, but I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have any numbers on that. But one thing that I do know is that climate change is a worldwide, God's creation, human population, everybody affected. And maybe not yet, but it's heading that way. And, you know, I certainly feel concerned, like for those people mining lithium or dealing with the toxicity of lithium and cobalt. Nickel, on the other hand, is probably a pretty good byproduct out of our own Kennecott copper mine. So that's less of a concern. And the thing that I take some solace in is that the lithium in those batteries, when they're done, they're going to be able to recover that. One of the most heavily recycled metals in this country is lead. And it's because you take if you're a conventional car, you have a lead acid battery, something else you don't have to either. But at any rate, that lead acid battery, to replace it, you got to turn that core in. And that's why it's so heavily recycled, and lithium batteries won't be any different. So that's how and just to answer your question, most definitely. I mean, I want to switch over, but I do see the possibility of, you know, I mean, during ski season, you know, you got to get up the canyon. We're certainly going to look at a plug-in hybrid, and I think that'll work fairly well. And I can imagine that the battery will get pretty low going up, and then coming back down, it'll go back to near where it was, because that regenerative braking does work very well. And we even see it, the river that was in the children's message, the Chagrin, there is a hill not too far from here that when we go down that hill in the summer, it drops 400 feet in elevation, and we pick up 3 miles of range just going down that hill. So there is, you know, that give or take. That means that we can do things with these electric cars and, you know, keep that renewable energy going.
Yeah, Steve, I totally agree with you. Marcus and I love to drive our Leaf up the canyon until it's basically empty and we've gone as far as we possibly can. And then wherever we stop and enjoy the scenery. And then we drive back down and completely recharge. It's super fun.
It is really fun. So, and that's the way it works. So it's basic physics. So it's good that way. So
I really want to encourage the folks on mute here. If you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. We do have 5 more minutes. And one thing I'll just add while you guys are thinking, if you have a question, here in Utah, is there a way for people who don't buy gasoline at the pump to be able to pay taxes that go toward maintaining our roads? Because that's something that I kind of feel guilty about as a EV
There is
driver.
now, and if you haven't encountered it yet, you will, and that is a surcharge. We had to pay an additional $200 here in Ohio with the Volt, because even though it's a plug-in hybrid, we still have to, it wouldn't be any different, I think, if we had a Tesla or whatever car we had, a Leaf or whatever. But the state governments have woke up to this. Probably, well, I'm not going to say anything political, but a certain party probably said, wait a minute, that's not fair. And so, and I think even in Utah, there is now a fee for your, and it's not a complete compensation, really. The cost of the roads, I mean, the amount of road tax that's in gasoline when you buy it, it's a significant percentage.
Yeah.
I think it should be a higher percentage, because then it would encourage more electric vehicles. But, you know, not everybody would agree with that, especially somebody who has a pickup truck that only gets 15 mpg. So one thing I'd like to mention, that we are recording this, so it is going to be out on YouTube in case anybody wants to share it. And, you know, I really am thankful for everybody's, you know, our panelists and all the questions that have been asked, and realize that we're available and you kind of know who we are. And if you're considering an electric vehicle, you know, I think any of us would be glad to talk personally, you know, with you about the many advantages and the few negatives that exist too. One that I had on my notes to be sure to mention that, and I don't know if those of you with, you know, well, my fellow panelists with plug-in or electric cars, but you need to keep your eye on the weather. We have actually unplugged our Volt from its charging if there's a thunderstorm where lightning is striking the ground. And we do this, in fact, we now have a surge protector on the 110 line that charges the Volt, just to be doubly safe.
Just like a computer.
Well, just like you would on a computer or a flat panel TV or anything that has more microprocessors in it. And we did hear a little bit of a horror story. I don't remember where I heard this, but somebody had a lightning strike near their property with a Volt, and it took out the computers on the Volt, and the insurance company considered the car totaled. So yeah, you don't want this to happen to you. So if there's lightning striking the ground, think about unplugging that vehicle. You might get a little wet if it's outside, but you'll be glad if that happens. So little humorous side note, not so humorous for that person though. So any other questions or anything? We are, I don't know. I haven't looked at the chat lately. I'll look at the chat, but I know that Chelsea, you're on it. No questions, no questions. So, and thanks for the discussion. So that's great. Thank you, Keith and Becky, on that. So, okay. And we got to my kind of wrap-up question was, would we do it again? And it looks like we're unanimous that we all like these vehicles, and it's a definite yes. Let's make the next one electric also. Anything else, or should we sign off? Any last minute questions or thoughts from our, you know, the three of you joining us on this with electric vehicles?
No, I think that as long as I'm still in a family that's able to afford them, then it's electric for the rest of my life, unless things are really bad and I would only go back. I would never go back to gasoline, but I would use an internal combustion engine that runs on vegetable oil, because I have a lot of experience with that, and it smells nice. The exhaust does.
I like that. That's good. Yep. I think electric cars are going to be with us, and in a big way, and we might be surprised in 15 years with it. So
I'm kind of a wonk, and I look at the science channels, and I watch the technology that they have that we'll see in 20 years that is absolutely fantastic. And it's, you know, you have batteries that are encapsulated in plastic that you can cut and will still work. So they can be in crashes, they can be in, it goes to the safety issue of the lithium ion battery. And, you know, they're getting better and better and better. And so, in my opinion, it's just making sure that we support it, and look at it from a position. If you're talking with somebody, you know, trying to slay this or answer any fear questions that people have, because that's what I see that happens out there in the market is everybody's scared of the unknown, and they want to make up these grandiose horror stories, and I don't think there are any so far. I've had one for 4 years and haven't had any problem at all. So.
Well, thanks, Don. And I just think it's so cool that Jen's company's new development has added so many charges for the future, because
Absolutely.
That's a real hopeful sign for where our environment is headed.
Sure is.
Yep, most definitely.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you all again for this lively discussion. And again, if you've got questions, do reach out to one of us. And otherwise, I think the Green Justice group will meet in another couple weeks on a Wednesday evening, and we'll talk further about this and that. So,
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yep, thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.